Hello and welcome to the Devoted Outdoorsman Podcast. What is up, guys? I hope you guys are having a great week and you're ready for this week's episode of the Devoted Outdoorsman Podcast. So if you haven't already checked out last week's podcast, definitely go do that. But also, we released a little bit of a new podcast content thing last week. It's called the Land BS Podcast. That was a little podcast that me and Josh, my buddy, kind of created last week off of kind of just, we were hanging out, and I was like, dude, let's just do a podcast. Let's just record what we're talking about and post it up. So basically, it's just kind of a cool little podcast you can listen to get to know us a little bit. Me and Josh are kind of goofy. We like to laugh. So this week on the podcast, we have Alex, and he is the creator of Whitetail DNA. If you've never heard of Whitetail DNA, you definitely need to go check it out. They've got some pretty cool blogs and some great video content on there as well. So with all that being said, let's go ahead and move into the podcast with Alex. We talk a little bit about how he got introduced to the outdoors, whitetail hunting North Dakota, and a couple bucks that him and his buddies shot up there. So let's start this thing, man. It's up to you.
Hey, thanks for having me on, first of all. But yeah, as far as how I got into the outdoors and into hunting, it kind of all started with, growing up, my dad was an avid outdoorsman, hunter, and instead of him being where I'm more of a hardcore deer hunter, he was more of just an all-around bird hunter, deer hunter, kind of did it all. And that's where I really got my introduction to the outdoors, tagging along with him. And then as I got older, I kind of just fell in love with deer hunting. As a kid, when we would go deer hunting, it was kind of the classic. You go out with your dad during rifle season, opening weekend, and wouldn't really see much. And then when I got to be about 13 or 14, I was introduced to a friend. He's kind of consider him as my uncle now. And he was a big bow hunter and thought I should get into bow hunting. And so when I was 15, I got into bow hunting. And to that point, I had still never shot a deer. And so my first deer ended up being with a bow. And it was a pretty cool experience because my first deer I had shot with a bow from a ground blind at about, it was just a doe, and she was probably 10 or 11 yards away. So it was a really cool experience. And then kind of from that day, I just got hooked on bow hunting and kind of never looked back.
Yeah, man, it's really cool that your first deer harvest was actually with the bow. A lot of times that's not necessarily the situation.
Oh, I was just going to say, I definitely had my mishaps with the rifle before then, missing deer and stuff. But the first one I ended up actually getting was with a good old bow and arrow.
I've talked to a lot of hunters over the years, and I've come to realize that if you hunt long enough, you're going to have a miss story. Moving forward from that, Whitetail DNA, how did you kind of come up with the name for that? And let's talk a little bit about that.
I was trying to, obviously try to be unique, and I knew I wanted the word whitetail in my name just because of how great that is for, for people to find me for when they're searching stuff. And then I was kind of just throwing around, like, what could I put in front of it or at the end of it that no one else had come up with. And then I kind of was thinking, I actually had almost called it Whitetail Bloodline. And so I was trying to think of something that's, where it kind of runs in your blood, runs in your system. That's kind of where my head was. And then all of a sudden one day I was in class and DNA kind of just popped in my head, and I was like, kind of hoping and praying there's no whitetail DNA out there, and there wasn't. So that's kind of where I got that. And as soon as I thought of the DNA, I knew that's what I wanted to call it.
Yeah, definitely. One of the hardest things about this podcast adventure that I'm on now was finding the name. I came up with probably 500 different names when I was trying to find the right name for my podcast. I had names that I would hit up my friends and be like, hey, man, what do you think of this? And they were just like, I don't think you want to name it that. That's not a good name. And then finally, one day, it just hit me, the Devoted Outdoorsman, and that was it. I knew that was it. So once you kind of had your name picked out, did you really know what kind of content you wanted to create, or was it just like, let's do a little bit of everything?
I know I wanted to write because I had done some freelance writing before that, and I enjoy writing. So I started out just with trying to get as much written content out as possible, and then as I got going, I got more into the photography and videography and trying to create just as much content as possible, really.
Yeah, man, and I've been checking out some of your video work, and I definitely like the stuff you're doing with the drones. That's pretty awesome. I also saw that you posted something on Facebook about how you had videoed some of this last year. It was like a turkey hunt, I believe.
Yeah, that was one thing I found challenging. I was really busy this year I had a job change, and so I wasn't able to get video out during the season like I wanted to. And so recently I've been going through some video from this past year and trying to get that out since I kind of got put on the back burner for a while.
And I wouldn't say it's necessarily a bad time to be releasing whitetail content right now because, people have kind of relaxed from deer season and now they got turkeys on their minds. So a little bit of whitetail content here and there is not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, no doubt about that. So I try to kind of combine with some of the older videos, and then I'm also putting out more of just vlog styles, kind of like what I'm out doing during this time of the year, whether it be scouting or shed hunting or what have you.
Yeah, man, I watched some of the videos that you released last week, and there was still quite a bit of snow on the ground up there. So have you had any success shed hunting?
Yeah, it's been brutal this year just with our winter. I found one in January before we started getting dumped on. The way we got snow this winter is every time it had not snowed long enough where, in theory, deer could have been dropping antlers. You go out there and find them, and we would get dumped on again, and it's been tough. We still have a ton of snow up. I was out tonight after work, and I had gotten to an area that was pretty much all melted. It was on a giant south-facing slope, and then on the walk back to the truck, I had to go through an area that I didn't really want to just to kind of get back quicker, and I was in snow up to my waist.
So these places that you're shed hunting, are they public land or like a lease you may have or permission or something like that?
It's pretty much all public. So where I live now, most of the areas that I'm hunting, shed hunting, scouting, it's part of an urban hunt. So it's in small areas, behind houses, around schools, stuff like that.
Yeah, so that's pretty cool. Urban hunting. So are you hunting in these people's backyards? Do you ever end up hunting really close to their houses or anything like that?
Oh yeah. One of my best spots last year, my stand was, I literally walked through the guy let me park in his driveway. I'd walk through his yard and I'd be about 40 yards off, from his yard. So it's pretty tight quarters in some areas.
So that's pretty awesome. So is this all in city limits?
Yeah, they're right in city limits. So you have to be a part of the city hunt per se. So you have to, every year you have to apply and go through a bunch of hoops and do a proficiency test, to make sure you're adequate shooting a bow and stuff like that. They take it pretty serious.
So moving forward from there, do you have any big plans, any good hunts or anything you have planned for 2018?
Not really any big plans per se, but it'll just be a big change for me because the last few years I was living out in North Dakota, and then this year I got a new job, so I moved back to Minnesota. I moved back to where I originally grew up. But with the way I've hunted North Dakota the last few years, and that's kind of where I spend most of my time. And so now I'll have to kind of change my strategy on planning when I'm going to travel out there. So it's about a 4.5 hour trip for me back out to North Dakota. So I have to kind of be more strategic on planning when I take my trips out there this summer to check cameras and whatnot, and how I'm going to hunt that next year, because there's some really good hunting out there that I want to take advantage of.
So we kind of got off topic, but have you found any sheds this year?
Just one shed so far this year.
I was creeping your Facebook earlier, the Whitetail DNA Facebook, and I had noticed that you and one of your buddies had shot some nice deer out there in North Dakota, man. Do you know what those deer ended up scoring?
My friend Tyler, he's my best friend out there that I do all my hunting with. Buck that he shot in, now what would have been, 2015? Yeah, that was, actually had that one officially scored. I think it grossed 182 and 2/8, or I don't remember exactly, but it was 182 or 183. And then the one I shot the following year was, I didn't get it officially scored or anything. I just threw a tape on it and just got a rough score. And I came up with 142 and change. So, but they're both pretty nice bucks.
No doubt. I was looking at them, and they're definitely big body deer. up there compared to what I'm used to down here in Oklahoma. What's the average body size on a deer up in that area?
Mature buck, you're looking around 200 pounds, give or take, Could be a little more, a little less. I think the one Tyler shot in 2015 was like 230, and then the one I shot was 215 or 220 maybe.
And both of those were bow harvest, correct?
Yeah, they were.
So if you don't mind, would you be interested in telling us the story of kind of how you ended up harvesting that deer that you took?
Yeah, the one that I shot in 2016 was, it was interesting because I've got kind of one chunk of public land that I focus, I'd say, most of my attention on in North Dakota. And I'd hunted this spot pretty hard throughout the fall that year. And then I'd actually shot a buck in November that I ended up hitting in the shoulder, kind of the dreaded shoulder shot, and he survived. So I didn't get him. And then as we got into late season, North Dakota is very interesting because deer will move a long ways to get to food. For instance, one of my buddies out there, he had documented a buck that had gone over 10 miles, which is pretty crazy. And so where I was hunting, there was no good late season food source. So once we got into December, I needed somewhere else to hunt because that year we had pretty much went from fall to just brutal winter. It was in the negatives. We got a ton of snow. And so where I was hunting, it was kind of like, shoot, I need to find somebody somewhere else. So I went to a big scouting mission one day. And I think it was, if I remember correctly, it was December 9th. And I thought I was going on just a scout. And I had found this cornfield. And in North Dakota, if a piece of land is not posted, you're legally allowed to hunt it. So I had found this standing cornfield. There was no posted sign, so I drove around the whole property and confirmed it wasn't posted. Therefore, I was allowed to hunt it. And this cornfield was just pounded with deer tracks. I mean, it was some of the most deer sign I'd ever seen. And I had a ground blind with me. So I popped one up on the end of this it's like a rock pile between these two crop fields. It was a really weird setup, but I put my blind tucked up along that because there was no cover. And then that night, as I kind of settled in, it was one of the coldest days I've ever hunted in my life. I think with the wind chill, it was in the negative 30s, maybe negative 40 for sure. So it was a little cold. And then that night, deer started pouring into that field, and I saw somewhere in the realm of 70 deer that night with a few shooter bucks. And I had these couple nice bucks and probably 20 or 30 does working their way towards me. And all my attention was on them, and I was filming them. And then I heard crunch of snow to my right, and I looked to my right, and there was this buck, the one that I ended up shooting, probably 5 feet from my ground blind. He had come from the other side of this like rock pile berm type of thing, so he couldn't see my blind, I couldn't see him. And he kind of comes around it, and all of a sudden he just, boom, right there in your face. We kind of locked eyes. I didn't know if I should move, because I knew if I moved he would run. And then he took off. And as soon as he took off, I drew my bow back, and he stopped and looked back at me, and I guessed him to be at 30 yards, and I sent the arrow, and he was probably about 30 yards because it hit right where I wanted it to, and I watched him go down, and that was a really cool experience. I mean, it was literally so cold that I saw him go down, but once he did, I sprinted to my truck, more or less. I could warm up before I went to go put my hands on him because I had lost all feeling in my fingers and toes, and it was pretty brutal.
You were saying in North Dakota it's legal to hunt property if it's not posted. That's pretty cool, man. I definitely think I need to get up to North Dakota and do some hunting up there then, because that's very interesting, and I wish other states were like that. But I guess that could actually lead to some issues.
It's interesting because, I've had friends that have hunted non-posted land where a landowner will talk to them, then they'll post it. So, it's a big deal because one of my main public land spot, the way to access it is through this private land, and it's never been posted. So I've gotten to know the landowner over the last couple of years. Now he actually lets me post it for him. So he signs the posted signs. I put the posted signs up. And what it does is, it blocks entry more or less to the public land. So the only way people can get to it is directly from the highway, and not many people want to park alongside the highway. So it kind of works in my favor.
Yeah, so you kind of have your own little secret passage into there now.
Yeah, exactly.
So I don't know about you guys, but I definitely think I'm going to have to make my way up to North Dakota at some point in time to do a little whitetail hunting. The fact that you can hunt on any land that isn't posted is kind of a cool thing, and I definitely think it would be a great opportunity for someone like myself to go up there and just, check it out, get my boots on the ground and hunt another state. I think that's something that a lot of us whitetail hunters actually dream about, is taking the time to get out of our home state and traveling to a state that's unknown to hunt some property that you've never been on just to test your skills. And I try to do that here in my home state from time to time. I go from, the eastern part of the state, and I'll go and hunt, the central part of the state, where the topography and the environment is a little bit different. And, sometimes I find even just that little amount of change to be quite challenging. Before we wrap this week's episode of the podcast up, I would like to talk to you guys for a minute about JV hunting. We had Jeremiah on the podcast a few weeks ago, and I just wanted to let you guys know that he's doing several giveaways on his Facebook page and on his YouTube channel, so you guys should definitely go check that out for a chance to win one of his JV hunting scopes. He's also giving away some of his fishing lures too, I do believe. Moving forward from there, I would like you guys to go check out last week's podcast with Josh. We did the Land BS podcast. I know I kind of touched on it at the beginning of this one, but I wanted to touch on it again to let you guys know that we will be doing one every week. We're going to try to do one every week, and they'll range on what we talk about and the time on them, just like these podcasts. Sometimes these podcasts are 20 minutes, sometimes they're 45 to an hour. That's exactly how the Land BS podcast will be, and most of the time it'll just be me and Josh goofing around, talking about plans and goals we have for the 2018 and future seasons. I'm going to do some live videos, I do believe, so if you guys want to be on there and do a little Q&A or just goof off with us, man, just check it out and we'll see what we can get going. I know. I always ramble at the end of these, but there's so much information I want to get out, and I just want to know that somebody's listening. If you don't mind, hit that subscribe button on YouTube, the Devoted Outdoorsman on YouTube. It helps me out tremendously, and it helps me keep creating content. So I hope you guys have a great week, and you guys tune in next week for another episode of the Devoted Outdoorsman Podcast.